Some photographs should simply not exist. Pictures so unsettling that medical experts have argued if displaying them breaches human dignity itself. In a remote part of rural Virginia during 1971, a young woman delivered something that defied all we believed we understood about human genetics, family lineage, and the blackest secrets families will murder to keep safe. Her name was Sarah Mae Whitaker, and when the physicians initially saw what came from her womb, 3 of them left the delivery room. 1 of them never worked in medicine again. The infant born on that October morning was not merely the result of incest. It was the climax of something much more sinister, a lineage so knotted, so tainted by generations of intentional inbreeding, that scientists would afterward deem it impossible. Still, the medical charts exist, the photos exist. The child existed for the short period it was permitted to breathe. But this is what will stay with you long after this video is over. Sarah Mae was 17. And when officials demanded to know the father's identity, every single adult male in her family, her father, her uncle, her grandfather, and even her brother, claimed he was responsible. Not from shame or as a confession, but from pride. They were shielding something they named the pure line. This was a family custom, meticulously kept for more than a century in the Appalachian Hills, a place where outsiders did not go, and inquiries were met with violence. The infant survived for 6 days. During those 6 days, it would reshape medical textbooks and expose a family secret so grotesque, the FBI ultimately classified the case files, locking them away from the public for 50 years. Those files were discreetly declassified in 2021. Hardly anyone noticed. Hardly anyone is aware of what is in them. Tonight you will discover why some truths are hidden so deeply that just saying them feels like you're trespassing on sacred cursed ground. The Whitaker name initially showed up in the census records for Roanoke County, Virginia, in 1847, when Joshua Whitaker laid claim to 200 acres of mountain land no other settler desired. The earth was poor, the winters were harsh, and the closest town was a 3-day journey over dangerous terrain. Joshua, however, was not seeking prosperity. He was seeking isolation. And in those distant hollers, where the morning fog held to the mountainsides like secrets unwilling to fade, the Whitaker family started an experiment that would last 5 generations. Joshua came with 2 wives, Martha, his legal wife, and Rebecca, her younger sister, whom he claimed as a companion by frontier law. The local pastor, desperate for any flock in the wilderness, sanctified both unions. By 1855, Joshua had produced 14 children with the 2 sisters. But this is where the tale takes its first grim twist. When those children reached maturity, they did not look for spouses in neighboring families. They wed each other. The family journals, found decades later in a concealed cellar under the original homestead, show a troubling philosophy. Joshua thought that blending bloodlines made the human spirit weaker, watering down what he termed the divine essence God had put in his family's line. He persuaded his children they were selected, special, and that their purity had to be protected no matter the cost. By the 1880s, the Whitaker family tree was not a tree at all. It was a gnarled vine, wrapping back on itself repeatedly. The children born of these unions were not the same. Neighbors gossiped about the Whitaker children who didn't speak, who moved with odd gaits, whose eyes contained a void that seemed to peer through you, not at you. Local physicians declined to assist with Whitaker births after 1890, stating the family was cursed. The family, however, saw no curse. They saw perfection. Every generation reinforced the practice, certain they were nearing a sort of genetic ideal that the outside world was too degenerate to comprehend. By 1920, the Whitaker lineage had turned into something that challenged natural law. What began as marriages among siblings had grown into something much more intricate and unsettling. The family had created what they named the rotation system, a meticulously planned schedule where every fertile woman would carry children for several male relatives in a set sequence. They maintained fastidious records, handling human reproduction as if it were a breeding program for farm animals. Charity Whitaker, Sarah Mae's grandmother, was born in 1925. The result of a union between her mother and 3 separate men, her grandfather, her grandfather's brother, and her own uncle. The genetic analysis performed decades after would show that Charity's DNA held patterns that ought to be biologically impossible. She was at the same time her mother's daughter, her mother's niece, and her mother's cousin. Her chromosomes narrated a tale of such intense inbreeding that contemporary geneticists at first believed the test results were tainted, yet Charity survived, and even more unsettling, she prospered inside the family's warped ecosystem. She was raised to think the outside world was filled with lesser beings, genetic mutts who had tainted their bloodlines with outside influences. By 15, she was pregnant with her first child, whose father was her own father, who was additionally her uncle and her cousin. This child, Thomas Whitaker, would later become Sarah May's father. But the word father loses all significance once you grasp the real nature of their family structure. The Whitakers had built their own cut-off society with its own regulations, its own reasoning, and its own definition of what was normal. Children were raised not knowing which adults were their parents, siblings, or cousins, as those distinctions had stopped being important long ago. Everyone was connected to everyone else in numerous ways. They talked in low whispers about the blood calling to blood, and were convinced that every new generation moved them nearer to reaching what they called the perfect circle, a state of genetic purity that would give them powers beyond common human comprehension. By the 1960s, at the time of Sarah May's birth, the family had been entirely cut off from the outside world for more than 100 years. They possessed their own language, their own traditions, and their own awful secret, which they protected more fiercely than their own lives. That secret was just about to come into the world, and when it did, it would destroy every assumption about the boundaries of human genetic deformity. Sarah May Whitaker was 17 when she understood she was pregnant with something that felt unlike the other pregnancies she had seen in her family. By that point, she had already delivered 2 children, once at 14 and again at 16. Both infants, however, had died just hours after birth. Their small bodies were too deformed to support life. The family referred to these deaths as offerings to the blood, required sacrifices on the journey to genetic perfection. This pregnancy, however, was different. Sarah May could sense the child moving in ways that defied logic. Rather than the soft kicks and turns of a typical fetus, she described feelings that frightened even her toughened family members. The child appeared to pulse instead of move, making rhythmic waves over her abdomen that looked very much like contained lightning. Her stomach swelled to a massive size by the 7th month. It stretched her skin to the point it was translucent, revealing a web of dark veins that looked like they were squirming under the surface. The family was overjoyed. The elders whispered this was finally the one, the climax of their century-long breeding program. They had created something past human, something that would demonstrate their superiority to the degenerate outside world. They readied for the birth with the passion of religious fanatics, arranging complex rituals and ceremonies to greet what they thought would be their genetic messiah. But Sarah May was dying. The pregnancy was eating her body from within. She dropped 40 pounds even while her stomach kept getting bigger. Her hair came out in chunks. Her teeth became loose and started to fall from her gums. Most unsettling of all, her eyes started to change color, turning from brown to a strange pale yellow that appeared to glow in the dark. The family saw these changes as signals of a divine transformation. But medical professionals who later looked at her case files knew they were symptoms of extreme genetic toxicity. Her body was, quite literally, being poisoned by the anomalous fetus developing within her. When Sarah May started labor on October 13, 1971, she had been unconscious for 3 days. The family had brought her to the closest hospital, a small rural clinic 30 miles away, only because they desired medical proof of what they thought would be the delivery of a new kind of human. They never dreamed this choice would reveal their secret to the outside world, or that the infant Sarah May delivered would become the topic of secret government research for the following 50 years. Dr. Margaret Powell had delivered more than 3,000 babies in her 20-year career at Mercy General Hospital. She had witnessed every complication, every malformation, every tragedy that human birth could create. But when the Whitaker family brought Sarah May through the emergency room doors that October morning, Dr. Powell realized instantly she was about to see something that would stay with her for the remainder of her life. The delivery took 14 hours. Sarah May never woke up. Her body was racked by contractions so fierce that they broke 2 of her ribs. The medical staff had trouble monitoring the fetus. As its heartbeat made patterns their equipment was unable to correctly read. Instead of a normal heart's steady rhythm, the monitors displayed erratic clusters of activity that looked more like brain waves than heart function. Nurse Patricia Williams, who helped with the delivery, later stated that the sound from Sarah May's womb was not the typical fetal heartbeat, but something that sounded nearly like whispering. When the child at last emerged, the delivery room went completely silent. What Dr. Powell witnessed defied all principles of human anatomy she had ever been taught. The infant was, technically, alive. It was breathing, its heart was beating, its eyes were moving, but its shape was such that it seemed to mock the entire idea of human form. Its skull was massively enlarged, almost double the size of a normal newborn's head, yet transparent enough for the brain to be seen through the skin. That brain was not like anything in medical texts. Rather than the usual folded structure, it seemed to be made of dozens of smaller, distinct organs that pulsed independently from one another. The child's limbs were joined in impossible ways. Its arms came out from its torso at incorrect angles, finishing in hands with too many fingers set in spiral patterns. Its legs were wound around each other like vines, and in the place of feet, there were formations that looked like tiny faces, with moving eyes and mouths that opened and shut without a sound. The most unsettling part was the child's face, or faces. There were 3 of them, overlapping and sharing features in a manner that made an expression of a constant quiet scream. If you are still here, you are braver than the majority. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done if this was your family line? Because the next events would challenge the boundaries of human compassion and medical ethics in ways that experts still argue about today. The infant was alive, but was it human? Did it have a right to live, or was its continued life an act of cruelty beyond comprehension? Dr. Powell had 6 days to find answers to questions that would defy all she believed about medicine, morality, and life itself. The infant Sarah May delivered was not meant to survive. Every medical rule indicated that such extreme deformities would not be compatible with life. But somehow, this warped combination of human genetics kept breathing, moving, and existing in a state that defied the very definition of being alive. Dr. Powell decided to keep it alive, not from hope, but from a dreadful scientific curiosity about what human biology's limits could truly endure. For 6 days, the medical team at Mercy General Hospital became unwilling observers of something that seemed more like a supernatural event than a medical issue. The child did not cry. Instead, it made sounds that nurses said were somewhere between a hum and static. Its several eyes moved on their own, following different items around the room with an intelligence that seemed unlikely given its deformed brain structure. Most disturbing, it seemed to react to its family members' presence in ways that hinted at recognition, perhaps even affection. The Whitaker family kept a continuous watch around the infant's incubator. They talked to it in their odd dialect, sang tunes nobody else could understand, and conducted rituals that appalled the hospital staff. They brought items from their mountain home: gnarled pieces of wood, stones set in specific patterns, and pictures of other family members displaying generations of progressively worse deformities. They named the child the Culmination and the Perfect One, handling it with a respect that was both moving and profoundly unsettling. But the infant was dying, and its death was not like anything medical science had ever recorded. Instead of the slow organ failure common in severely deformed infants, this child appeared to be dissolving from the inside. Its clear skin started to show dark spots where internal parts were breaking down, but instead of creating distress, these changes appeared to give the child a type of peace. Its several faces, which had displayed constant upset for the first 5 days, started to ease into expressions that nearly looked like contentment. On the 6th day, when the morning shift came to check on the infant, they discovered something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The child was still living, still breathing, but sometime in the night, it had managed to position itself in a way that was geometrically impossible, given its fused limbs. It was lying in the incubator in a perfect spiral, its gnarled body making a pattern that looked like ancient symbols none of the staff recognized. And in that pose, with what looked like a smile on all three of its faces, the child at last died, taking with it the blackest secret of American family genetics, and leaving questions that are still unanswered today. In the hours after the child's death, Mercy General Hospital was overrun by federal agents. They came in unmarked cars, dressed in suits that looked wrong in rural Virginia, holding briefcases and gear the hospital staff had never seen. They said they were from the Centers for Disease Control, looking into what they called a potential genetic hazard to public health. But Dr. Powell knew right away these men were something different. The agents took everything. The infant's body, all the medical charts, the pictures the family had brought, even the gnarled pieces of wood from their mountain home. They questioned every staff member who had been near the case, forcing them to sign papers that legally banned them from ever talking about what they had seen. The official death certificate named the cause as multiple congenital anomalies, a sterile medical phrase that said nothing of the real horror that had happened. Sarah May died 3 days later, her body at last giving in to the genetic toxicity that had been eating her during the pregnancy. The Whitaker family, crushed by the loss of what they saw as their greatest accomplishment, withdrew back to their mountain compound, never to be seen in public again. Local police who tried to investigate their property in the years that followed reported the buildings were abandoned, although neighbors claimed they could still hear singing voices in the woods on some nights. The classified files, released 50 years later, showed the truth the government had worked so hard to conceal. The infant born to Sarah May Whitaker stood for something that defied basic assumptions about human genetics and evolution. Its DNA had sequences that seemed completely artificial, like someone had been purposefully manipulating the family's genetic code for generations. Most unsettling, an analysis of the family's genealogical charts revealed their breeding program was not random or by chance. It had been following a set pattern, a genetic formula that appeared designed to create precisely what Sarah May had delivered. The last page of the classified report has one single, chilling paragraph. The Whitaker case indicates the possibility of deliberate genetic experimentation across multiple generations, carried out by unknown groups for unknown reasons. The family's isolation and methodical breeding program show a degree of organization and long-range planning that is beyond what would be anticipated from remote rural populations. More investigation is suggested to find out if similar programs exist in other parts of the United States. That investigation never took place, at least not in an official capacity. But somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, in areas where outsiders do not go and questions are still met with violence, there might be other families following other programs, striving for other culminations we are not ready to comprehend. The tale of Sarah May Whitaker and her impossible infant is finished, but the questions it brings up about the hidden parts of American genetics and the powers that could be manipulating them remain as dark and unanswered as the mountain hollers where secrets like these are born.